Church Growth Unleashed, diving into all things leadership and church growth. Provide the help, encouragement, insights that you need along the journey of growing yourself as a leader and your ministry. Well, welcome back to the Church Growth Unleashed podcast. My name is Danny Anderson, your host, and you guys are in for a special treat today. I have with me via Zoom, all the way from Canada, my friend Rich Birch. And Rich is, he's an incredible man. He is doing some great work for God. If you don't know who Rich is, you got to start at the Meeting House, which is a church in Canada that he helped to grow as a multi-site church to be one of the largest churches, if not the largest church in Canada, reaching over 5,000 people on a weekend with, I think, 20 locations, something crazy like that. Rich has also authored an incredible book called Church Growth Flywheel, which, if you guys have not picked up this book, absolutely worth every penny. We have used it at Emmanuel to help hit some of our numerical goals. It's a fantastic book, and he's also helped to shape churches like Connexus Church in Canada, where Carey Nieuwhof was pastoring, North Point Community Church with Andy Stanley, and also Liquid Church in New Jersey. And right now, Rich is leading a coaching organization called the Church Growth Incubator, where he is attempting to help 100 churches reach 1,000 people in attendance. And so you're doing great work, Rich. Thank you for being here today and being our guest.
Well, Danny, I'm honored to be on your show and honored to be a part of what you're doing. I love what you're doing here. Listen, I love that you're saying church growth right in the title, because I know I've got some, people throw darts when I use that word too, but I love talking about that. We want to reach more people and ultimately, obviously, see those people take steps towards Jesus. So I love that you're talking about that here, and happy. And I love what you're doing at Emmanuel. What a great church. God's doing some amazing things there. And so honored to spend some time with you today.
Man, thank you so much for that. So I am excited to have this conversation because I love your book. I've read it and I dig it. I'm like eating it up every chapter. I've learned some things. You've given me some perspectives I hadn't thought about before. We're going to dive into some of that today. But I saw the other day, let's just start with this. Carey Nieuwhof actually posted this on his Instagram page. I don't know if you saw it, but it was a little graphic that said 82% of people would come to church if a friend invited them, but only 2% of Christians invite their friends. Now, the name of your new book you just came out with is called, and that's why I asked you to come on here today to talk about this, is called Invite Culture, Unlocking Your Church's Invite Culture. Man, such good stuff. Why is it that Christians don't invite their friends to church?
Well, I like to take responsibility for that as a church leader. I think it's our responsibility to help cultivate invite culture. And so rather than like pointing fingers at why do the people in our churches not invite, I think it's our job to say, hey, that's something we've got to disciple them towards. We've got to build them towards, the difference between stuck and stagnant churches and growing churches is growing churches train, equip, and motivate their people to invite their friends. And you've really got to do all three of those things. You got to train them. That's like the head part. Why is this important? Work this through, talk it through, from examples from scripture. You've got to train them. You've got to equip them. You got to give them tools. That's like the hands part. Like, hey, we got to give them invite cards or social media graphics, things that they can use to invite their friends. And then you've got to motivate them, which is really the heart part. That's like stories. And, we have to tug at their heartstrings and explain to them why, man, this is the thing that will ultimately change the world we're in. And so I think, frankly, the reason why it doesn't happen in more churches, and this isn't the case at Emmanuel, but at other churches, is because we're not taking it on our responsibility as church leaders. It's our responsibility to, like I say in the book, unlock the invite culture at our church, to cultivate that culture, to cultivate that approach in our folks.
So they would do it if we would teach them, motivate them, and train them to do it. I totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great response. Okay, so invite culture. In your own words, you wrote the book. How would you put that in your own words? Like if you said, hey, that Emmanuel or this church or Connexus Church has an invite culture, what does that mean in your own words?
Well, I'll tell you, I got a text from my mom this morning. And so I, often think, man, if my mom gets it, that's amazing. So her and my dad, I like to say they live in the home. They don't like to say that. They live in a seniors community, which is amazing. And just this morning, my mom texted me and she said, hey, we invited our neighbors to come to, we're recording this right before Christmas, to come to a Christmas thing at church. And she's like, they're super bitter. They got hurt by the church years ago. To the point where actually when their daughter got married, this is all in a text my mom sent me. When their daughter got married, they wouldn't let a pastor lead the ceremony. They said, you have to have like a judge or somebody like that, a non-religious figure. And my mom reached out and invited them to come to a Christmas thing this year. Now, and she was super excited about that. To me, that is invite culture. It's people in our churches taking responsibility to see the world around them and to say, hey, I want to engage with my church to in the work of what it means, the redemptive work of Jesus, to reach out to our community. It's reaching out to my next door neighbors, Larry and Laura, who, it's staying in the game over a consistent amount of time. This isn't like some marketing trick. It's not just some, it's not word of mouth marketing. It's saying, hey, as a Christ follower, my job is a part of what it means to be a Christian is to be consistently saying, come and see, come and see, come and see. There's something amazing. It's really partnering with our church. Which then ultimately does drive the growth of our churches. That is the reason why people come to your church, dear church leader. They come because people invite their friends. In some ways, I think this has been relegated. My background is from the attractional church movement. I say that without an apology. That's where I've spent a lot of my career.
Amen.
And I know that it's not fun to say that anymore. It's like people don't like us saying that. But the thing that we got right there that is true in every church, even if you would say you get allergic if I called your church attractional, is the reason why people come to your church is because people invite their friends. That is what happens. And so if you're interested in seeing your church reach more people, you've got to build the culture of your people to ultimately invite their friends.
So good, so good, man. I could not agree more. You're preaching to the choir here. So
Great.
Hey, let's assume that our audience today this is not intuitive. They don't have an invite culture in their church, but they want one. They're interested. They're going to tune in. They saw the title of this podcast. You talk about in the book, and I appreciate this, that it actually begins with small steps. I'm going to read a quote to you that you wrote. You said the aggregation of marginal gains will improve your church's invite culture. Can you expound on what that means from the pastor's perspective, who's just like starting from scratch? They don't have an invite culture.
Well, so the good news, bad news here. The bad news is there is no silver bullet to building an invite culture. So, in fact, like the church marketing people don't like me because church marketing people say this. They'll be like, all you need to do is this. And all you need to do is run great Facebook ads. All you need to do is whatever. And they come up with whatever they're selling you. And they convince you that you just need to do this one thing and that will grow your church. And that's just not true. What we've seen time and again is that churches that build invite culture, they stick to it over an extended period of time, and it's a multiplicity of things. It's a whole bunch of small things encouraging your people to invite their friends. And so that's the good news is there isn't one thing. That's also the bad news, in that it's going to take a bunch of stuff, but it can be just as simple as the way we do announcements on the weekend. It can be as simple as having invite cards available for people, or the way we talk about our church on our website. It really is a bunch of small steps, all leaning in the same direction. In the first book, Church Growth Flywheel, we talked about this. That's really the core metaphor in the book, that I remember when I was a kid, they had these things called merry-go-rounds at the park. I don't know. They don't have a lot of these anymore because they're super dangerous. It's like a giant metal disc, and there's like maybe 4 posts on it.
So dangerous.
And you put one foot on the disc and then 1 foot on the ground, and you push it around, or you run beside it. And the thing is, that first time around is a heavy push. You're pushing really hard. And then the second time is like a little bit less. And then the third time, a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less. And somewhere along the line, you go from pushing hard to hardly pushing. That has been my experience with church growth, that it's a bunch of things all leaning in the same direction over time that helps our churches grow and builds our invite culture.
Yeah, that is super encouraging because it gives hope. Like if you will touch these, if you will do little things over time, it can get to the point where it actually starts to work itself, you know.
Well,
So
it's hopeful, but it also the reason that some people don't love it is because, like, you could title this podcast "How to Grow Your Church in 1,000 Days," and the reality of it is, no one would listen to that podcast because people don't want to wait that long. But that's the reality of it. It takes time, and
Yes.
Emmanuel's a good example of that. You know, it's not like your growth does happen in fits and spurts, but it's over time that you build momentum, and we see this time and again. You know, pastors' kind of most effective season typically is in the second decade of being in a church because it takes time. You've got to lean in and build momentum, but there's cumulative gains over time that once that, you know, flywheel gets rolling, man, it's an unstoppable force. It's incredible.
Yeah. I hope our listeners paid attention. You said decades, a second decade. That's a lot of time. So really good stuff. So in the book, you talk about some of these, you know, these different things. You just to name them. You talk about shareable weekend teaching. I want to dive into that. Eventful big days, capturing online conversations, captivating conversations, magnetic community service, and appealing volunteer experience. And when you get these different things going, that creates this culture. So let's dive into the shareable weekend teaching. How exactly do the weekend messages, you know, foster and create the invite culture?
Well, pastors, if you're listening in, particularly if you're like a lead pastor, senior pastor, teaching pastor, you're in that kind of primary communication space, I want you to lean in and listen for a second. What you do is incredibly important to the church. Now, I know you know that. You spend a lot of time, effort, and energy every week on your message, so you understand that that's important. But it's like statistically important. There are two major studies that have looked at this. One, the most pessimistic one, says that 75% of the reason why, it was done by our Gallup friends, 75% of the reason why people attend church is because of the teaching every given weekend. And then actually the more optimistic one says 83%. What does that mean? It's a big deal for the church. It's not like, and it's interesting for me, I'm not a primary communicator. That has not been the seat I've been in. And, you know, I've been in that kind of executive pastor second seat, which means everything else that we do is like is only 25% of the reason why people attend. So this is a huge deal. So it's important to our, it's important to invite culture on a number of fronts. The one is really the speaking is the primary place that a church crafts its culture. And so, you know, the way what you speak, your words have the ability to create the culture of your church. And so invite culture needs to be woven into, there needs to be assumptive language. If you're looking for something that you could do this weekend, it's a bit of a party trick. You know, Danny, if I came to your church this weekend and we were talking about, you would not be imagined, and it's again, not at your church, but at other churches, you wouldn't believe how many times they'll say like, oh, what do you think we could do better? And I'll say to the teaching guy, I'll be like, listen, that was an amazing message today. It was incredible. But like, you didn't give any hook for why people should come back next weekend. What are you talking about next weekend at your church? And in fact, it's one step bigger than that. You need to not just give a hook for what's coming up next weekend, but you need to explain why people should invite their friends to come to that message next weekend. It's like the old Batman show. You know, it's like the cliffhanger at the end. You know, will the Cape Crusader survive the flight over the cliff? Will his car land on the, well, join us next time. Same bat time, same bat channel. The same thing is, hey, we're in Romans 2 next weekend. And, you know, here's 3 questions that we're going to be talking about. Do you know people who are asking these kind of questions? You should invite them to come be a part of what's happening at our church next weekend. Now, that alone, you do that every single weekend for the next year, and what you'll start to see is people will start to invite their friends because you're empowering them. Now, there's a lot more we can do there. It's about invite cards. It's about, as we kick off series, what do we do every time we kick off a new series? There's a bunch we could do there, but we need to think carefully around how are we framing the messaging, the teaching we're doing in a way that encourages our people to invite their friends.
And you talk about some more of those practical things in your book. So I want to encourage you guys to pick up the book. We don't have time to get into all of those examples, but yeah, one thing before we move on to the next gear, I wanted to ask you about. You gave a great metaphor, between the difference between painkillers and vitamins. That stuck with me. I'll give you a chance to explain that to our listeners, because when you said that, I was like, man, that makes so much sense. Painkillers versus vitamins.
I had a painkiller versus vitamin experience recently in my life. So my wife is very good at taking vitamins. I probably should be. Like every morning,
Yes,
she takes a cocktail of like, I don't know, 15 different like gummies and all different things. And I know cognitively over time that those are the right thing. Like I should do that. And, you know, the ones that taste yummy, I'll take them. But 2 weeks ago, I had an ingrown toenail. And let me tell you, I woke up and I put on my shoes and my foot was incredibly painful. And so I literally like got in my car and drove to I Googled, what do I do for an ingrown toe? And I'm like, you pick up, Epsom salts, you're going to like bath it. You're going to like take some sort of Tylenol. And I took action on that right away because I had a clear pain in my life that I needed to fix. Now, too many times in our preaching, we categorize our preaching as vitamins. It's like, if you do these things, eventually your life will be better. But we've got to categorize them more like painkillers. Hey, what we're talking about is solving real world problems in your life today. That same study from Gallup that talked about what people are looking for in teaching, the two things that people are looking for, one is they want their teaching to be based on transcendent truth. So people, despite popular opinion out there, people want you to teach ancient truth that applies to their lives today. The second part is the applies to their life today. People want to come on Sunday and understand, how does this make a difference on Monday? And so it takes a little bit of extra work. That doesn't mean you need to always do like 4 tips for your marriage or 6 reasons, you should be a better dad or, that kind of stuff. But you do need to think carefully. Every time I open the scripture, if I'm honest, I know there's stuff here that should change my life today. That needs to be, we cannot skip the what difference does this make? Now, oftentimes we back end load our messages with this. We like back end load, and here's the difference that this can make. This is the application. I remember when I was in school, that's what they taught us, always get to the application. But really we want to front end load that from a shareable teaching point of view. People should know what this series that's coming up, these are the kind of problems it's going to solve in your life. If you know people like this, this is who will enjoy or who will find this teaching particularly helpful. It's more about help than it is about hype. It's not about hyping, here's some great thing. It's about how can we help people with stuff that actually makes a difference in their lives today.
That's so good. And you also say in the book, like when the messages are really solving pain points in people's lives, they will share those messages with their friends. And then all of a sudden there's this domino effect. You got to come hear this, my pastor speak about this. It's really changed my life. And so I really, really appreciate that. So, okay, there's so much more we could talk about there, but we got to move on to the second gear here, which is the eventful big days. Talk us through, this has been from the Church Growth Flywheel, you talk about this there as well. How do big days help to cultivate this whole invite culture?
Well, again, back to our premise that churches grow because people invite their friends. Well, what we know is in most churches, there are 3 or 4 days a year when 2 things happen. Their friends are more likely, or they're more likely to invite their friends, and their friends are more likely to attend. So your people are more likely to reach out to their friends, and their friends are more likely to say, sure, yeah, I'll come. I'll be a part of that, which is incredible. Now, we want to take advantage of those days. We want to load up as much as we possibly can on those few days a year that make it as easy as possible for our people to invite their friends. Now, for years, I used to say like, I'd look at the church across town that would do the like singing Christmas tree thing at Christmas time, or they would have like Jesus would ascend into the clouds at Easter. And I'd be like, that's all stunts. I'm not going to do that. That's dumb. Like we should not do that. Every weekend is the kind of weekend that we want to do where people invite their friends. And while that's true, if you look at the actual behavior of your people, they are more likely to invite. And this is true, I would say. So I'm in Canada, served in the Northeast. I love communities that are, post-Christian or maybe even pre-Christian. And even in those communities, people are more likely, your friends are more likely to come on those big days. And so we've got to cast those days. And the way I think about it is we want to create days that have it's like almost like putting different lures in the water when you're fishing. Like we want to do a bunch of different things on those days that'll be easy for me to invite my friends. Hey, come to our Christmas thing. We're doing a photo booth. Or hey, come to our Easter thing. They're giving away baskets of chocolate for the kids. Or come to our Mother's Day thing. We've got this great thing going on for moms that day. We're doing a flower. I saw this church last year at Mother's Day, which I thought was cool. They partnered with a floral shop, and that floral shop showed up, and they had all of these flowers set up so moms could make their own bouquet on Mother's Day. I love that.
That's cool.
And then obviously the message is each of those has like a slightly different, like on Mother's Day, for instance, it's like, what mom, if you're a mom here today, use the fact that you're a mom, invite all your kids to come. Which parent is going to which kid is going to turn their mom down on coming, or vice versa. If you have a mom, invite her to come on that day. So it's leveraging those days, and these two, and the rest of the books are great. And the rest of we got lots of other gears to talk about it. But listen, friends, Danny's digging into the two biggest, highest impact ones that we talk about in these churches. So shareable weekend teaching and eventful big days. These are the gears in the 5 gears of invite culture that kind of provide the biggest, the heaviest weight, the easiest lift, the most kind of impact on a church. And time and again, Danny was kindly saying like, hey, that Eventful Big Days has had an impact on their church. We've heard that repeatedly time and again. Churches that get behind saying, hey, and let's actually get behind the weight of our people wanting to invite and give them a bunch of resources and motivate them to do that. Man, it makes a huge difference to their church.
We have totally seen that play out. And so we have seen that our church doesn't necessarily grow incrementally through the year. It grows through the surges of our big days. We have seen that year after year after year. So pastors, if you're not leveraging the big days, man, start it. Pick up the church growth flywheel and run. Rich has got a playbook in the book. He literally lays out a big day calendar, and we have taken that, Rich, and we have made it our own, and we run it every Christmas, every Easter, every Mother's Day, and it's really, we've gotten great results with that.
Well, that's super encouraging to hear, and I appreciate that you're seeing results on that. Kind of a little bit extra for church leaders to think in. The benchmark that we coach leaders towards is your big days. You should be like the kind of starting point, the table stakes. You should be seeing double your normal attendance. So if you're a church of 500, you should be seeing 1,000 at 3 or 4 times a year. That's totally possible. That's not like, there's no way you can do that. And that's like the starting point. If you're not there, you should for sure be doing all this stuff. If you're there, let's pour some more gas on it and figure out how we can, see even more people connected to your church and connected to the message of Jesus.
Yeah. So good. So good. Okay. So gear number 3, this is the one that threw me off. I'm not going to lie. I was reading the book. I was like, wait a second. What? Gear number 3, captivating online conversations. Okay. So senior pastors that I talk to, myself included, like on the online church experience, it gives us all heartburn. It really does. You even say in the book, I'll quote you to you. The online church creates questions like, will people develop a deeper relationship with Jesus through this online experience? And so there are lots of questions, and I don't really want to dive too much into whether or not we should focus on that. That's probably another conversation for another day. But you do say we've crossed the Rubicon and we're not going back. And I agree with you. We have put tons of resources to online church, but it still doesn't completely feel great. But yet I know we need to leverage this opportunity. So you say that online church and online conversations is a way to leverage the invite culture or create it. I don't quite understand that. And you use a word on page 114 called native. You said we have to use native language, and I would like you to explain that for myself and also for our listeners.
Well, thanks for the challenge. I love it. So so first of all, the big idea, captivating online conversations. What we see is churches that are leveraging social media or online church. They're not doing it in a way that's just saying, it's not like a billboard that's saying, hey, come to our church. They're trying to stir online conversations. They're trying to leverage these networks to ultimately have conversations. And it's those conversations ultimately that drive to invite. So it's ultimately, how do we get people to engage, have discussions, to lean in on the content? There's a bunch we could talk there, specifically on what I'm talking about there on 114 is about this kind of weird thing that we're doing with lots of church online's streaming experience. A little bit of kind of context. So I remember in the early days of COVID, remember those days? I know I just like all of a sudden put a chill on everybody and they're like, let's not talk about that, please. We do not want to go back there. But let's remember those early days. March 2020, it was like there were lots of churches in church, including churches I coach, that looked down on church online and were like, we're never going to do that. That's not the real church. That's fake. And then what had happened was, all of a sudden, very quickly, within a week, everybody figured out how to stream their services, and we were all online. And friends, including mutual friends of ours, were like, "We're never going back. It's all online. There's in-person church is dead." And I remember at the time, I felt like I was one of the few people raising a hand saying, this is going to pass. Like the church, the name church literally means gathering. Like we are going to gather in person. Like that is.
I spent time there. I did.
Yeah, we are in the events business, whether we like it or not. Like that's what we do. And and then what happened over time is we went through this whole thing, and then now it feels like the pendulum has swung so far the other way, where now you have churches that are like, we're getting rid of our stream. We're never going back. That's a terrible. Why are we doing that? It's a hassle. All that. And I've been like, whoa, wait a second. What we learned through that experience from an invite culture point of view is the majority of our guests are coming and seeing us first online. They're seeing us in the online environment that we're doing. This includes
100%.
social media, live stream, podcast, all that stuff. I use the word native though, because I think most of us our experience online, it's kind of like Christian television in the 80s. You remember Christian television in the 80s? It was like there were guys on Christian television that what they were radio people, and they would sit at a desk and talk like this into a microphone on Christian TV. And then there were a number of Christian TV people that figured out, actually television, the native format, which is still true to this day, the native format to TV is variety shows. And so folks like the PTL Club and all that, they figured out, hey, the way to do Christian TV is make it look like a variety show, make it look like American Idol or who's got, America's Got Talent or whatever. And it flourished. And it was, and that is still true today. The other format that works well is Talking Head News, which obviously the 700 Club, all of that has figured out. That is like the native formats to television. Well, what we're doing with a lot of our streaming stuff is it feels like we're taking an in-person thing and just displaying it online, where the folks, when I use the word native on 114, I'm talking about If Gathering, which I think is great, Jenny Allen's movement, and they, I think, have unlocked what church online is going to look like in the future. It is not just the stream. It's purposeful social media. It's discussion-based groups online. It's atomized. It's like little pieces of content. It's a whole bunch of different pieces of content kind of delivered. It's taking the same message and delivering it in a way that feels like it is made for the format, in that case, social media. Right. And so
and
that's
the way people actually consume social media. So it's taking our message. Good.
So if you take your average message on a weekend, at a church is somewhere between 35 and 40 minutes. We see that time and again, super sticky number. But if you were to put that on, if you take your average YouTube views, if you just take your message and drop it on YouTube, look carefully at what's happening. If you only put that 40-minute message up, your people are watching the first 40 seconds of that and then dropping off. So we've got to, this is why you see churches chopping up the message into into 90-minute little sections to replay across social media. We've got to do that kind of work to make it fit, to make it feel like it's more native to, to the environment, if that makes sense. And ultimately that's wrapped great. Up in this conversation that, the highest goal, and we've seen this, unfortunately, there are some churches, again, not Emmanuel, but there are some churches out there that have figured this out. They figured out that Facebook is an argument engine. And so they're like, we're gonna frankly argue with our culture on there and say all kinds of things that are offensive, and Facebook boosts that algorithm. We don't want to be a part of that. But the thing that and they've grown on the back of that. Those churches have grown on the back of that because they've figured out, hey, if we argue with enough people, some people will like us and come, which is, you don't want to do that. What you do want to do is think of your content as how can we cast this in a way that it'll drive conversation on all of these social platforms, that ultimately it'll be like, oh, that's an interesting idea. I'd love to contribute to that. I want to be a part of that captivating online conversation ultimately.
I love that. And that takes effort. It takes focus to be able to do that. So super good. Okay. So let's jump into our fourth gear here. This one also kind of caught me off guard. I was like, okay, because at our church, we do community service events. I've never thought about it through the lens of, hey, this is going to cultivate and foster and invite culture. On page 128, you talk about a service project that you actually did on Staten Island when you were with Liquid Church, which, by the way, is where I grew up. It's crazy.
Oh, nice. All the good people come from Staten Island.
Oh, I don't know about that. But my brother's house was hit really hard by Sandy. You were probably working right close to him at that time. But you say that, quote, ideal opportunities, these service projects are ideal opportunities for people to invite their friends to join the church. And it's like, then you talk about how you've had more at that time, Liquid Church you saw a higher percentage of first-time guests go to outreach opportunities than to a new series on the weekend. And I was like, what? That's crazy. I've never even considered pushing a community outreach event as an opportunity to invite friends to. I don't even think I've said those words before from the platform. So talk me through that. Is that something that you guys just stumbled upon? Or how did you get to that point?
Well, yeah. So we stumbled upon it in what we were doing because, like Emmanuel, it feels like the God thing to do. Like, we're called to make a difference in our community, and
Absolutely.
So we would try to move our people out of their seats and into the streets to make a difference. But over time, what we started to notice was, well, people would just naturally invite their friends to come to this. And then as we were doing research for these books, we realized, wow, like the fastest growing churches in the country, they're all doing these mass mobilization events or a high percentage of them are doing mass mobilization events where they're getting people out of their seats and into the streets to make some sort of difference. And you can see when then you just add the layer, like you say, of it, let's cast this as an opportunity to invite friends. Man, you'll see first-time guests come to these things. I'll give you an example. So the example I use in the book was we did when that first of the next wave of Star Wars movies came out. We had like the most attractional things going on. Christmas Eve that year, we literally had dancing stormtroopers. It's all the stuff that people that hate attractional church. We did it. We had dancing stormtroopers. We did. We had these manger scenes, or like kind of like sort of manger scenes, and there was like the good side and the light side and the dark side. You literally could sit on Darth Santa's knee and tell him, and he would be very disappointed in you. Or on the other side, there was like Chewbacca and Yoda, and it was amazing. So all the stuff that you'd think, and it was a huge deal. It was the first time we had 9,000 people on an event. It was great. Now, catch this. A month before that, we did a meal packing event where we packed 350,000-ish meals for the poor. We had more documented first-time guests at the meal packing thing than we did at the Christmas Eve, crazy Christmas Eves, the cosmic Christmas Eve thing that we did. And the same continues to be true. We just did a meal packing thing at the campus that I'm a part of, at our church. We're like 300 people. We did a one-day packing thing. Now catch this. You'll have 2% is a normal number on any given weekend. You'll have 2% documented gifts or guests. So if you think of 300 people, so that's like 6 typically you would have on any given weekend. We did a meal packing thing where we had 450 guests and we had about 40 first-time guests. So almost 10% on that weekend, 5 times what we normally would have.
Wow.
And at the same time, we packed 60,000 meals to send to indigenous communities and actually to Ukraine. It was a great weekend. Now, we follow up. The thing you got to catch there is you got to invite your people. So you do the same stuff. It's like, hey, we're doing this thing. Let's make invite cards, invite your friends to come. It'll be a great thing. And then follow up with those first-time guests like they're first-time guests.
Sure,
so,
absolutely.
invite them to your next experience, do all that stuff. Hey, let's come to our Christmas Eve service, all those kind of things. So yeah, magnetic community service is a big deal, and not completely surprising, Danny, that it's like It's like a lost opportunity in most churches. It's a, hey, there's like, ooh, this could be something, we're already doing this. Let's just add a layer on top of it. And we'll see good things happen. Get everybody a t-shirt, take great pictures, build some social media stuff around it. At the events, have photo booths, that kind of stuff to make it a fun thing, and people will invite their friends.
Yeah. We at our last staff meeting, actually it was just on Monday, one of our staff members told a story. We do this time of celebration. I'm sure you guys will guys do that as well. And he stood up and he said, I just want to share a quick story about a lady that hadn't been going to church for a super long time, but because she had heard about our work in the community and the difference that our church was making on a practical level, she said, man, I would like to go to a church like that. And 100%. She came to church after like 15 years of being gone. And, it's like, wow, that it really does work. Like people want to be involved 100%. In an organization that's touching people's lives in a practical way. And so, Rich, I'm taking that. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, just to underline that. So I love that because the people in our community see it as a good thing, right? Like they're like, hey, that's a good thing. We know it's a God thing, but we're not going to fight them on the details. Hey, why don't you come along, come join with us? We'd love for you to help us. We're both seeking, it feels like a very Jesus-y thing. We're seeking the best for our community. Like we can agree on that, like, and come with us, come join, make some friends, let's work together. It particularly, I would say lots of our churches are concerned about reaching men. And these kind of events, to be honest, are a great way. There's something about saying, hey, can you come stand shoulder to shoulder with me? We're going to make a difference. We're doing a community park cleanup. We're doing at Liquid years ago, we did this event that it gets me choked up still to this day. We came out of Father's Day and we challenged our guys to do Extreme Makeover. That show, like kind of like Extreme Makeover, move that bus for a battered women's shelter, and really cast it as, hey, these are men that are using their strength to help women who have had men use their strength in negative ways against them. And so, hey, who wouldn't? That's like an easy invite. Like, hey guys, can you come for the weekend? Help us like swing a hammer, help us do some painting. We want to make a difference in those women's lives. And let's do that together. Huge opportunity for our churches.
That's great. That's great. Okay, for the sake of time, I want to jump into our fifth gear. We got one more gear left, and quite honestly, this third one, the first two, like you mentioned, like that was kind of intuitive for me. But even the last three, this last one included, I was like, man, I've never thought about cultivating an invite culture by growing our volunteer experience or our volunteer team. In the book, you say people who serve invite. What a simple statement. And then you talk about this 1-to-3 ratio. And I actually real quick did the numbers in my head because I know how many people we have on our impact team and I know how many people we have on the weekend. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's 1/3. That's crazy.
It's a great party trick.
It really is. Explain the 1-to-3 ratio and why the 1-to-3 ratio actually is true and why it works.
So the kind of big idea here is volunteer service precedes the growth of the church. So if you grow your volunteer teams, that's a leading indicator of growth in the church. This has been the mechanics behind multi-site. I know you guys, I was happy to hear you're launching more campuses, which is great. Your community needs more Emmanuels, which is fantastic. So that makes, and that's the mechanics behind behind multi-site. This is the mechanics behind this. And frankly, my work in multi-site is what drove this one, because I saw this time and again. What is the 1-to-3 ratio? It's pretty simple. If you add for every one volunteer you add at your church, you end up with about a church of about 3 people. So if you add 100 volunteers, let's say you launch a new campus and you can find 100 volunteers to go to that new campus, you'll end up with 300 people at that campus. And it's a really predictable way. And it might look slightly different, like it might be, but it's within that range. It's right around this kind of 30%, 33%, somewhere in that range. And so what that means is, and this happens all the time in multi-site. Typically in multi-site, the churches we've coached, and even just across the industry wide, usually we see 2/3 of the people that volunteer in new campuses are not volunteering before. And so often you'll see the growth that comes at the back end of multi-site is using that same ratio. So you got 75 new volunteers. I can't do the math on that. 75 times 3 is typically where the
Yeah.
new campus ends up at. And so this is a critical piece because particularly for, say, like kids ministry, lots of churches, 50% of the church is kids ministry people. We need to celebrate the fact that it is a volunteer intensive area, because that's actually helping the church grow. So a church leader that's saying, hey, we've got enough leaders today, what you're saying is we're done growing. We don't want to reach any more people.
Wow, that's a big statement.
We have to be constantly saying, how can we add more roles, more people? What's the pipeline for getting people connected? How do we find more people to get plugged into teams? So yeah, and then that is both sides of that. It's ultimately, I think that the key to volunteer recruitment is appealing volunteer experience. Is it the kind of thing that people want to be a part of? Is it the kind of thing that they'll tell their friends about? You will not believe how great it is to serve in my church because of this. They'll tell their friends about that.
Yeah, they're invested. They're giving their time. They're giving their heart. They're using their skills. And when people are doing that, they want their friends to be involved in that. So it makes complete sense. I've just never ever thought from a leadership perspective, hey, this is where I need to focus my time, is building that impact team in order to grow the church. So, okay, we have covered a lot of ground today, 5 gears. Rich, as we're wrapping this thing up, where would you encourage a pastor to start? If you were to say, I know there's 5 different gears, but let's just say I don't have a invite culture. What would be the low-hanging fruit, a good place to start?
Well, I would start with, first of all, I'd love to give away the first 2 chapters of the book to your listeners. And so if they just go to unlockinviteculture.com/Danny, that's just unlockinviteculture.com/Danny. I'll give you the first 2 chapters. And if I can be honest, like the publisher type people don't like this, but like the first 2 chapters covers everything we've just said and outlines what you should do. And I would start with the first 2 things we talked about, which is shareable weekend teaching and big days. So we're recording this around Christmas. The next one coming up is at Easter. I'd be thinking about, okay, how can we make this the kind of thing that people will invite their friends to? That would be a great, and then even just the simple thing of, hey, what are we doing for our next series to communicate it in a way so that our people will invite their friends? Think about who are the kind of people that should come to this series, and then let's think about how we can encourage our people to invite their friends. That would be where I would start.
Awesome. Super practical. And thank you for that. It's very generous. I hope you guys will go to that link in the show notes there and pick that up. We'll put that there for you and pick up those 2 free chapters. Any closing thoughts just as we wrap up today? Any final words?
Well, Danny, I want to just honor you and your leadership. Your church, I don't know your church well, but I know, I've interacted with some of your team and seen from the outside. I know you're going to actually come on our podcast, which I'm excited about. But you guys are You guys are a life-giving church. You're making a difference in your community, and ultimately, it's about creating churches that point people towards Jesus and seeing more people take steps towards him. And I just want to honor you for what you're doing at Emmanuel and for the culture you've built there. It's making a difference, and I'm honored that the work we've done has had a small impact on what you're doing, because I deeply respect the church that you're leading.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Rich. And thank you for influencing and shaping not just our church, but literally thousands of churches through your writing, through your unseminary podcast. If you guys don't know about Rich's podcast, check it out. Super practical, super helpful. And again, his books are Church Growth Flywheel. This one's super helpful, practical. And then the newest one we just talked about is the Unlocking Your Invite Culture. We'll put both of those links in the show notes today. The man is called Rich Birch. His book is Unlocking Your Church Invite Culture. The podcast is the Unseminary Podcast. You can catch Rich on Instagram and X as well. And I hope you'll reach out to him. Rich, thank you so much for blessing us today, encouraging us, giving us some really practical stuff that we could take. I'm going to start pushing on some of these things myself to help even further our invite culture here at Emmanuel. So thanks again for being here.
Thanks so much, Danny. Appreciate you.
Hey, guys, we will see you next month on Church Growth Unleashed. Have a great day. Blessings.